Welcome to Whispers of History, where forgotten tales, strange events, and mysterious moments from the past come alive. One whisper at a time. Subscribe, relax, and let the past whisper you to sleep. When we think of medieval London, our minds often go to bustling markets, crowded streets, and the echo of carts and horses against cobblestones. But tonight, we begin in silence. It is just past midnight in the year 1321, the Thames lies still under a silvered moon. Most of the city slumbers behind shuttered timber windows and thatched rooftops. The air is heavy with the scent of soot and ale, mingled faintly with something warmer, yeast, dough, rising crust, a quiet city. But not a sleeping one, because beneath the hush, a parallel world begins to stir, down narrow lanes near Bread Street and Cheapside, in the deeper shadows of East Cheap and beyond the reach of candlelit windows. The first signs of life emerge not from voices, but from ovens. You see, London's bread didn't wait for daylight. While noblemen slept and monks whispered midnight prayers, the bakers of the city were already hard at work, kneading, shaping, rising, watching. In these early hours, before law permitted the public sale of loaves, the bakers were granted permission to begin their craft. It was one of the few labors allowed to burn fuel during curfew. The communal ovens roared to life in darkness. Flames danced behind brick mouths like sleeping dragons disturbed from their rest. Apprentices moved like shadows, barefoot, quick-handed, careful not to drop the trays of rising rounds. And in this quiet ritual of bread, the story of the midnight grocery begins. It wasn't just baking that happened in these hours, it was barter. Quiet trade. Secrets passed from hand to hand. Bread may have been the centerpiece, but in its orbit moved many, a weary servant girl with a crumpled hood, her master's purse hidden beneath her cloak. A fisherman, fingers still red from scaling, offering dried eel in exchange for rolls. A cloaked priest buying 4 loaves, 2 to keep, and 2 for the poor. They came not to market squares, but to side doors, alleyways, back hatches. In some parts of the city, secret wooden shutters opened at chest height. Through them, rough brown loaves would slide into waiting hands in exchange for coin, or sometimes just a whispered promise. Bread, in medieval London, was more than food, it was currency. Lifeline. Proof that the city still breathed, even at midnight, and yet, bread was also tightly regulated. The price of every loaf, down to the ounce, was controlled by law. The assize of bread and ale, a statute from 1266, declared what a penny should buy in breadweight depending on the price of wheat that week. If you sold a loaf too light, you could be pilloried. Too heavy, you lost profit. Too soon, before daybreak, and you faced the wardens of the city guilds, who roamed the dark streets like silent judges. This balance between necessity and restriction gave birth to something unexpected, a hidden economy of midnight groceries. They weren't called groceries, not officially. The Grocers Guild, one of the 12 great livery companies, hadn't even formally taken its name until the late 1300s. Back in 1321, they were still the Pepperers, a small but powerful group of spice traders, not bread sellers. But in back rooms and alleys, the name grocery meant something different. It meant provision. It meant what could be gotten, when everything else was closed. And so, slowly, quietly, a web of night markets was spun beneath London's cobbled skin. Some stalls rolled in on wooden carts with iron-rimmed wheels, creaking softly over stones. Others were nothing more than wide baskets laid open beneath arched doorways. But the most secret, and perhaps most enchanting, were the mobile trays, carried on shoulders like a vendor's tray, draped in cloth, the goods tucked beneath. Within them you might find warm oatcakes still steaming, tiny cloth pouches of dried plums or figs, rough rounds of barley bread tied with twine, and, sometimes, little wax-wrapped bundles of salted fish, all illegal to sell at this hour, all sold anyway, not for greed. Not to defy, but to feed the maid too poor to shop by daylight, the sailor about to embark, the night watchman with nothing to eat but candle ends and scraps. This was not thievery, it was survival, and it was everywhere. Even the air smelled different at this hour. Gone was the acrid stink of tanner's urine or midday dung. Instead, there was the scent of burning ashwood, of wheat baking into crust, of onions stored in cloth sacks, and torches. The torches burned low, usually made from tallow-soaked rags tied to wooden poles. They didn't shine. They glowed faintly, as though even light dared not speak too loudly, and in their flicker, faces emerged like ghosts, not noble faces, not famous ones, but the real soul of London, soft-eyed, half-shadowed, calloused, hushed. This is the London few ever wrote about. It wasn't in court records. It wasn't painted in church manuscripts, but it existed, night after night. It lived in the flour dust that never left a baker's tunic. It breathed through the puffs of steam from loaves unwrapped too soon. It whispered through the streets just before the city woke. By the time the sun began to rise and the first roosters crowed, the midnight groceries would vanish again. The carts rolled away, the baskets tucked back into doorways, and the scent of warm bread drifted upward toward the rooftops, telling the city what it missed. In our next chapter, we'll follow the footsteps of a real character, the journeyman baker who wandered London's night alleys with a wooden tray and a stolen recipe. But for now, let your thoughts linger in the soft glow of torchlight, in the clatter of footsteps on wet cobbles, in the low hush of forbidden commerce, in the warm breath of a city that never truly slept. The midnight grocery had only just begun. In the folds of London's midnight, where bread moved quietly and coins barely clinked, there walked a boy who knew every crack in the cobblestones, but owned not a single crust himself. His name was Elias Crowthorne. He was 16. Maybe 17. No one was ever sure. Not even him. He had no family name of importance, only the surname of the alley where he was found swaddled and left, behind a tanner's shop in Crowthorne Lane. By trade, Elias was a journeyman baker. He had no guild seal, no family crest, only a set of clever hands, and a mind sharper than the blades that carved crusts. He learned his trade not in kitchens of lords, but in the soot-dark ovens of Southwark. The master he worked under was gruff, prone to throwing flour sacks when angered, but Elias was quiet, observant, and above all, fast. By night, he helped carry loaves to hidden carts. By dawn, he returned the trays wiped clean. But Elias had a secret. He had stolen a recipe. Not just any recipe, the black rye of Bermondsey, a bread said to last 6 days, and feed a man through 3. The master baker had kept it locked away in a brass-bound ledger. But Elias, quick of eye and finger, memorized the symbols. It wasn't just the ingredients. It was the technique, soaking the rye in warm ale overnight, mixing it with ground flaxseed, carving a slit in the center, not the top, letting it bake slow in dying coals, not flame, a poor man's loaf, cheap, hearty, nearly impossible to burn. Perfect for night cellars, perfect for Elias. With his stolen craft, Elias began baking on his own. Not in a shop, not in a licensed oven, but in a clay hearth built beneath an abandoned stairwell near Ironmonger Lane. There, shielded by a crooked grate and a curtain of night, he lit fire with stolen kindling and baked the first loaves of what became known in whispered tones as the rat bread. Not for rats, of course, but because it moved silently through the city like one. You could find it by asking, "Have you seen the tale?" And if you were trusted, a warm, wrapped loaf would slip into your hands before morning. But Elias didn't bake for coin, he baked for the others, the ones like him. The washer girl who slept behind the fishmonger's cart, the 3 chimney boys who shared a blanket and frostbitten toes, the widowed sailor's wife with 3 mouths to feed and no means to feed them. They gathered near his oven like moths to a hearth, some brought kindling. Others brought salt or old cloth, but none were turned away. Each night, Elias made 6 loaves. Never more, 2 for trade. For those who needed them, it was a secret economy of kindness, disguised as shadows. Of course. Secrets do not stay secrets long in London, especially not among the guilds. The Bakers' Guild heard whispers of loaves sold without license, loaves that stayed fresh for days, loaves too good to be from scraps, loaves that never saw the light of the city ovens. And so, on the 3rd moon of spring, the guild sent a warden, a tall, silent man named Barrack, dressed in midnight blue with a torch in one hand and a scroll of names in the other. He did not announce himself, he simply waited in the dark, near the corner of Milk Street and watched. That night, Elias delivered a loaf to a blind beggar and her dog, another to a boy with soot on his cheeks, a third to a woman in black mourning dress who pressed no coin into his hand. Only a touch to the shoulder. Barrack saw it all. He could have stopped him then, but he didn't, because Barrack, too, had once been hungry, and so, with a flick of his torch, he turned and walked away. That night was Elias's last in London. The next morning, the stairwell hearth was cold, the baskets gone. The scent of black rye faded. Some say he left for Bristol. Others say he was taken in by monks, but the recipe lived on, not in ledgers, not in vaults, but in the hands of those who shared it, passed not by ink, but by bread, and in the midnight grocery, among flickering stalls and silent coins. If you ever find a loaf carved with a center slit and a scent of ale and ash, know that Elias walked there once, and left the city fed. Long after the bells of London tolled midnight, and long before the cock's crow cut through fog and frost, there existed a strange and flickering world that never made it to the city's ledgers or scrolls, a market that was never officially opened, and never truly closed. There, beneath torchlight and whispers, London's forbidden fruits were traded, not fruits in the poetic sense, though there were secrets and scandal enough to season any tale, but real fruits, figs, dates, saffron, almonds, goods too rare to appear in daylight stalls without license, goods carried by ship, taxed by hand, measured in whispers. The market had no formal name, but among those who knew of it, night bakers, watchmen, lonely monks, lost children, it was simply called the Flicker. You would not find it by map. It was not near Cheapside, nor Smithfield, nor the usual city walls. It shifted, moved like a phantom. Some nights it hid beneath the charred ruins of an old chapel, other nights it emerged behind the tannery gates of Shoreditch, where even the rats kept their distance, always in shadow, always guarded. To find it, one had to follow the light, but not just any light. The torches were special, their ends dipped in beeswax mixed with saffron powder, giving off a faint golden shimmer, warmer than usual, like candlelight caught in amber. Only those who looked carefully, or smelled the faint sweetness in the smoke, would know where to turn. At the edge of such a torchlight, the market would appear, not loudly, not all at once. First, the creak of an oxcart's wheel, then the rustle of burlap sacks on frostbitten cobble, then a low voice muttering weight and measure, and finally, aroma, a breeze carrying cloves, roasted nuts, sour cherry wine. Among the regulars was a man named Old Byram. He was not old by age, but by manner. Always wrapped in 3 cloaks, 2 of them unnecessary. He walked with a limp caused by nothing and claimed to be half-blind, though few could match the sharpness of his gaze. Byram sold only 2 things, saffron and figs, but they were not just figs, they were forbidden figs, brought in burlap sacks from Moorish Spain, through secret channels into London's Southport, taxed under the name of timber shavings, and stored in the bottom of hollowed-out salt barrels. No one knew how Byram got them. And no one dared ask. His figs were sweet, slightly bruised, and deeply golden, if you pressed them gently. They gave just the right sigh of syrup. Byram sold them not for gold, but for stories. He would take copper, if you had it, bread, if it was warm, but his preference was tales. He had a knack for remembering your face, your voice, your previous lie, and if you made him laugh, he gave you 2 figs instead of 1. One night, a sailor traded him a tale about a mermaid in Dover Bay. Byram gave him a whole satchel. Another night, a nun in borrowed shoes whispered how she used to steal cherry tarts from the abbess's table. Byram wept laughing, and gave her a bag of almonds wrapped in red cloth. Beside Byram sat other sellers, a woman called only Threadbare Margaret, who stitched cloves into tiny cloth sachets and wore 3 wedding rings, none of which fit, a mute boy named Reeve, who sold tiny bottles of lemon oil and wrote prices in chalk, a slow-moving monk who sold candied ginger in old scroll cases, and at the edge of the flickering market, a man with no name at all, just a bell tied to his cloak, which chimed once when you approached and again when you walked away. He sold nothing, he only watched. Children visited the flicker too. They came barefoot, in cloaks borrowed from sleeping mothers, holding a single copper or a bit of honeycomb wrapped in cloth. They weren't turned away. Old Byram had a rule: if you come with quiet steps and wide eyes, you are welcome. No one ever broke that rule, not once. The market, though quiet, was never entirely still. A watchman might pass, a guild warden might sniff at the saffron smoke and narrow his eyes, but even they rarely spoke up. Why? Because every man, in some quiet hour of his life, has longed for something sweet when the world seemed most bitter, and in the flicker, sweetness could be found, for a story, for a song, for a sigh. But the market did have rules: no shouting, no running, no trading in silver, only copper, bread, cloth, or tale, and never, ever, say the word fig too loudly, because the Guild of Merchants had spies, and figs, in London, were taxed 6-fold, if sold legally. Byram once told a boy who shouted it, "Say fig again and we'll all wake up as fish bait." The boy nodded, and whispered, "Golden berries." Some nights the market would vanish before the dew fell, other nights, it would remain just long enough to see the sky turn violet behind the rooftops, and then, with a few nods, a smothered torch, a lifted cartwheel, it would dissolve, like a memory before waking. Today, you will not find the flicker in any history book. You will not read of Threadbare Margaret or the monk who sold ginger in scrolls. But if you wander a back alley near Bread Street and catch the faint scent of saffron in the wind, and if you see a strange torchlight, burning too gold, too sweet, follow it, and bring a story, you may still earn a fig. Long before Londoners argued over jam or butter on toast, there were deeper bread debates, ones that could cost a man his stall, his coin, or even his home, and in the year of 1324, one such man, Cobbler Ewan, a baker turned boot patcher, learned just how dangerous a crooked crust could be. You see, in medieval London, bread wasn't just food, it was law: how tall it must be, how much it must weigh, how coarse the grind, how deep the slash across the top. There were laws about what flour you could use, how warm the water must be, and even what time of night your loaf must enter the oven. If a baker failed to follow these rules, the punishment was rarely a simple scolding. No. London had its own way of keeping bakers honest. It was called the Assize of Bread and Ale, a regulation older than most buildings in the city. It told you, to the ounce, how much a loaf must weigh, and how many loaves you could sell before being dragged before a magistrate, and if your bread was found to be light, the punishment was not a fine, it was banishment, but not from the city, from the oven, Ewan had once been a fine baker, known for kneading with his elbows and singing Welsh songs to his dough. His loaves were misshapen, but kind. People said they tasted of chimney smoke and winter apples. But he had a weakness: he liked to stretch his flour. Add a little sawdust, a bit of ground bean, a splash of stale ale, just enough to make an extra loaf or two, and he always whispered, "It's still bread, isn't it?" Until one night, the weight men came. They arrived with wooden boxes and hollow stones. They wore grey cloaks and asked no questions. They simply lifted loaves, pressed them on copper plates, and measured the creak, and Ewan's loaves creaked too little. The next morning, he was tried by the baker's court. His punishment: no fire, no dough, no oven, for 2 winters. So, Ewan turned to shoes. He patched soles beside the lime wall behind the apothecary, humming bitter songs and watching his fingers grow soft. But every night, he missed the dough, the warmth, the steam, the crackle of crust. And then, one moonless night, something strange arrived. It came in a parcel, wrapped in grey felt, carried by a boy with no shoes and a letter tucked under his belt. The note was written in soot on scrap parchment. It read, "Bake this, but only under the bridge." Inside the bundle was a single piece of dough, already risen, already salted. Cold, but alive, and Ewan couldn't help himself. He tucked the dough under his coat and limped toward the old wooden bridge at the edge of Bread Street, the one where the river whispered like a gossiping widow. Beneath the archway, half hidden in reeds, was a clay hearth, abandoned, but dry. Ewan built a fire from shoe lasts and fence slats, and baked the loaf. What emerged was no ordinary bread. It was golden, crusted like old coin, smelling faintly of fig, thyme, and smoke. He took one bite, and wept, not because of the flavor, but because he recognized it. It was his recipe, twisted, perfected, stolen. Over the next weeks, loaves kept arriving, wrapped in different cloth. Sometimes delivered by girl, sometimes tied to the leg of a goose, each one a new version of his old ideas, and every note ended the same way: "Bake this, but only under the bridge." Soon, Ewan was baking nightly, but now, not with his recipes, with his rivals, who, he didn't know. The bread was different every time: light rye with cracked fennel, barley bricks soaked in molasses, crusts laced with burnt salt, but all of it was too good, and Ewan, the man once banished from baking, was now the secret baker of someone else's genius. Word spread, not publicly, but through whispers. Letters left in boots. Tokens handed in silence. They called it the banishment loaf. You could only buy it after midnight. You paid with shoelaces, buttons, or poems, and you never spoke of where it came from. And Ewan, he never found the mystery baker, but he never stopped baking, even after his banishment lifted, and the guild offered him his oven back. He refused. He simply nodded, packed his dough, and returned to the river, because some loaves aren't meant to be legal, they're meant to be loved. In the dark, under a bridge, where no one but the bread can judge you. If you walked down Honey Lane at dawn, you would think little of it, a narrow path tucked behind Cheapside Market. It bore no honey, despite its name. The smell was often wet cloth, shoe polish, and coal smoke. Its cobbles were uneven, its gutters slow. It was a lane most forgot, but not at night, because after midnight, Honey Lane sang, not with music, but with scent: nutmeg, cloves, cinnamon, star anise, fennel, rose oil, peppercorn, dried mint. The scents twirled down from wooden beams, drifted under windows, curled behind shutters, and rested, like perfume, on the lips of anyone brave enough to walk it, and no one knew where it came from, not exactly, except, perhaps, for a girl called Linnet. Linnet was small, sharp-nosed, and quick with her fingers, she carried a basket by day and a pouch by night. She wore shoes that made no sound and gloves that left no prints. To most, she was a delivery girl. A spice runner. Trusted with cinnamon bark and rose oil for abbesses, aldermen, and the cook at the Silver Bell Inn, but Linnet was also a thief, a very careful one. She never took gold. Never touched coin. Never opened vaults. She took only spice, but not the big sacks. That would be too easy. She took pinches. Threads. Shavings. Peels. She would slide a cinnamon flake from a careless stall, or a drop of anise oil from a dripping flask, and in the deepest hours of the night, she would walk to a hidden doorway off Honey Lane, and open the box. The box was never explained, set into a brick wall beneath a crooked sign. Painted once red, now rusted brown. Inside, glass vials, corked bottles, silver spoons, twine-tied paper scrolls. Linnet never put her spices in a bag. She labeled everything: clove dust, stolen from Bishop's Market. Crushed mint, from the innkeeper's apron. Star anise oil, slipped from the blind perfumer. And in return, she received recipes. Not instructions, stories, paper scraps written in broken script, to make the perfume that seduced the Archduke. To cook the bread that made the widow weep. The ginger that made old knees dance again. She never saw who left them, but each morning, new papers arrived. Linnet didn't sell the spices, she didn't hoard them, she set them free. She would coat the church steps with cinnamon powder, drop saffron dust into the baker's open window, leave anise bundles near the hospital beds. Wherever sadness settled, she sprinkled a little scent, and then walked away. The Guild of Scentmongers hated her. They posted notices, offered coin, spread rumors. They called her the moth of the spice room. But they never found her, because Linnet never stayed long, and she always smelled different. One night, the box was locked, sealed with wax, stamped with a strange crest, a curled serpent holding a key, and beside it, a single paper note: too many thieves, too much memory, let the spices sleep. Linnet read it once, then tore it, and that night, for the first time, she didn't walk away. Instead, she followed the scent trail backward, past the cheese stalls, past the wool merchants, to the Guild Hall of Scentmongers, a place no child should enter, especially not by roof. But Linnet wasn't ordinary. She climbed the chimney, lowered herself by flour sacks, and landed silent on the stone floor of the grand scent vault. What she found wasn't treasure, it was silence, shelves of forgotten smells, bottles sealed and labeled and never used, rose oil, unopened since 1293. Clove gum, for the Queen's wedding, unsmelled. Mint resin, harvested in plague year, untouched. Dozens of spices. Dozens of memories, wasted. She lit no fire, she made no noise. She opened just one bottle, and placed it near the chimney. The scent, orange blossom and grief, rose slowly into the air. By morning, every window on Honey Lane smelled of memory, and those who inhaled it wept. They couldn't say why, but all agreed, something sweet had returned. Linnet was never caught, the guild never found the box again, but some nights, when the fog is soft and the chimneys warm, a thread of spice drifts down Honey Lane, and someone smiles. In the quietest corner of the Milk Street Market, between the vinegar stall and a crate of salted radishes, stood a merchant few dared bargain with. He was called Old Thatch, though no one knew his true name. He never raised his voice, never smiled, never haggled, and he owned a scale, not an ordinary one, but a scale that remembered. It was bronze, lopsided, polished too often. Its base was carved from something that looked like bone. Its plates were rimmed with strange runes, worn smooth by time, But its strangest feature was this: it could not be tricked. You could not tilt it with your thumb, could not swap weights, could not whisper a lie without it knowing, and if you tried. It told everyone. No one knew who gave Old Thatch the scale. Some said it was found in the belly of a drowned judge, others claimed it was once used in the king's treasury, until it embarrassed a prince. One butcher swore the scale once hissed loudly. Whatever the truth, the rule was simple: if you sold by the pound in Milk Street, you used the scale, and if you cheated, the market would know, instantly. It began with a hum, a low, almost purring vibration beneath your feet, then the sound of rattling coins, and then the scale's voice: too light. Try again. Or worse, this hand lies. Most merchants obeyed, they weighed honestly, they bowed to Old Thatch. And they passed his stall with heads lowered, but one boy did not. His name was Finn, barefoot, nimble, bright-eyed. He sold stolen mushrooms, peeled onions, and the occasional apple recovered from a priest's pantry. Finn was fast, funny, and always hungry, and on one quiet night, when the city slept, he saw the scale unattended, and he touched it. Just a tap, just to see, just to know, but when he did, the left pan shivered, the right tipped, and a copper weight fell with a clang, and the voice spoke: "This touch remembers theft." Finn froze. He whispered, "I didn't steal anything just now." The scale answered, "But you did before." From that night on, the scale would not forget him. Whenever he passed Milk Street, even in daylight, coins in his pocket would rattle, fruit would roll from his basket, weights would flip from stalls, and always, that whisper behind him: "This hand lies." He tried to make amends. He gave away bread crusts to cats. He polished the steps of the old church. He returned, without being asked, a stolen egg. But the scale still whispered, desperate. He visited Old Thatch. The old man said nothing. He simply pointed to a small paper nailed to his stall. It read, "The scale cannot forget, but it may forgive." Beneath it, in faded ink, "Balance it back." So Finn began his long apology. He sold onions that were full, never peeled. He weighed flour honestly. He returned a full basket of figs he could have sold for silver. Each night, he visited the scale. Each night, it said nothing, until one evening, many moons later, as he placed a perfect mushroom on its tray, the scale whispered, "This hand learns." From then on, Finn weighed for others. He became the night measurer. Old Thatch disappeared. No one knew when. Some said he had always been just the voice of the scale, and now it had a new voice, a quieter one, but one that smiled. And to this day, under the flickering lanterns of Milk Street Market, you might find a boy, no longer a thief, balancing bread and lentils with a scale that no longer hisses, because every hand can lie, but every weight remembers. Another whisper from the past, now fading into the night. Thanks for listening. Subscribe for more sleepy stories from history. And until next time,